Welcome to SIMcast, a podcast brought to you by the Society for Imaging Informatics and Medicine.
Hello, SIMcast listeners. Today I've had the pleasure of sitting down with the team that won the 2025 SIIM Hackathon. It was called Team Agentic Vibes, and it was made up of two people. First is John Paulett, who is the principal architect at Hopper, where he leads agentic AI efforts, bringing vision language models into the radiology workflow. Previously, he was the founding engineer at Montage Healthcare, chief architect at Nuance Communications, CTO and co-founder Equium Intelligence, which was acquired by Red AI. Subsequently, at Red AI, he created Red AI Reporting, which was named OntMinis.com Best New Radiology Software in 2023. John is a longtime SIIM attendee and exhibitor. However, this was his first SIIM Hackathon and managed to win first place with his team Agentic Vibes. Second, we have Faris Siddiqui. He is an undergrad at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, majoring in brain and cognitive science with a minor in computer science. At Hopper, he served as an AI engineering intern, where he helped develop an agentic radiology assistant that integrates medical imaging models into clinical workflows. At university, he co-founded the Muslim Tech Collaborative, which was grown to over 70 members and hosts events spotlighting Muslim leaders in tech. His interests lie in the intersection of cognitive science and artificial intelligence, where he hopes to shape the development of more intuitive and human-centered AI systems. I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as I enjoyed conversing with both Faris and John. Welcome, SIMcast listeners. I am here with John Paulett and Faris Siddiqui from the Agentic Vibes team. They were the first place winners at the most recent 2025 SIIM Hackathon. And first things first, I must ask you both, can you explain to me the rationale behind the name Agentic Vibes?
I think it was just, SIIM occurred in May of 2025. And as we all remember, the exciting times of the early vibe coding and agent world, we thought that we could use vibe coding to help us build our hackathon project. And, MCP, and we can dive into that a little bit. I'm sure this audience knows a lot of the terms and the meanings of those at this point. But that was a relatively new concept that we wanted to leverage agents to essentially be able to dial back into the medical record or PACS to provide additional context to the radiologist when they are interpreting a study.
Yeah, definitely. I think you're just trying to encompass both the overall ecosystem of the computer science and the radiology world. Everyone's super excited both about agents and vibe coding, and also just the way we were building this was with agents and vibe coding. So I think John came up with it, but I think it perfectly symbolized what the project was.
It's pretty amazing too. When I look back at what we were doing in May of 2025, which to be honest feels ages ago in the changing AI world that we're living in. I mean, Faris, I think we were using just Claude AI, the website where we paste our code and on a single shot get responses back.
Exactly.
And just amazing how in the past couple months, when we were working together over the summer at your internship at Hopper, the industry just so fundamentally changed with agentic coding too, which I think in many ways is kind of laying some of the groundwork and additional thought process of how radiology workflow could be improved. As software engineers, we are kind of eating the workflows that we've been so used to. Claude Code effectively has given me a team of 5 engineers, AI engineers that I'm working with automatically with my various terminals. So yeah, if we had actual Claude Code for the hackathon, I think we might have actually gotten some sleep.
Yeah, maybe a little bit.
I don't think I appreciate the connotation of no sleep at the hackathon, but no, I'm joking. You probably were just excited, but it wasn't an expected thing, right?
Definitely.
We usually get a lot of questions because a lot of people think of hackathons that are, outside of the SIIM realm, and typically these hackathons are fiercely competitive. So when I get asked about the SIIM Hackathon, one of the first things I say is, hey, this is a hackathon that's very laid back, focused on collaboration and education. So there are no pizzas and energy drinks and people taking naps on the floor here. It's just easy. You did say that people might be familiar with these terms, but it probably doesn't hurt that we define them just in case anyone here is not caught up. So I know I heard terms like agentic or agent-based workflows, MCP, vibe coding. Maybe a quick introduction to what these mean.
Yeah, for sure. First of all, agents are just like agentic AI is basically taking AI, like your standard LLMs, to the next level, not just giving one prompt and answer. It's giving it the ability to complete multi-step tasks and have its own decision making, access to tools. So taking ChatGPT and giving it the ability to complete a task, like search on the web, add things to your grocery list, things like that. So that's like the agentic part of it. And then those other terms we talked about. So MCP stands for Model Context Protocol. So it's a protocol that was released by Anthropic, the makers of Claude, I think end of fall, winter 2024, and it's basically become the standard for implementing tools with AI agents. So think of it as before to connect any tool. So say with ChatGPT, you want to connect Google Drive, and you also want to connect your Notion. Talk with those different APIs. It would be a completely different framework for both. But MCP is basically just a standardized way to talk with any API you want. So it just makes it a lot faster to integrate new tools. And then vibe coding is basically just, it was coined by someone at Y Combinator. It's basically just what we're calling coding with an AI helper. Yeah, I guess that's the rundown of those different terms.
Nice. So when we post this, I'm going to make sure that we post a link to the YouTube video where your demo is shown. But in case anyone doesn't get to see this, I want you to tell us a little bit more about your project, including the meme that you used to describe essentially what you've set out to do, because I thought that was priceless.
I think John was the mastermind behind that. So I think.
Yeah, I think we had one of those memes of Oprah when she told everyone in the audience that they were getting a car. So our version of that meme was, you get a resident and you get a resident and you get a resident. And when Faris and I started, taking one step back, SIIM at the hackathon was actually his first day. He was starting this internship. He just finished up his freshman year, his first year at college, the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. And we had one conversation, bouncing a couple of ideas around, and kind of this question came up in our mind of like, what would happen if we could give radiologists an assistant, technological or human, right? Like, what would be ways that they could leverage using an assistant? And, it's interesting because I think so much of like AI has focused on really trying to cut down the time that the radiologist is already super fast at. Right? I mean, watching some of my friends read studies, I actually think their pattern recognition is so good that within about a second or less, they pretty much know all the major findings. But they're effectively playing librarian or detective, going out to the EMR, reading through clinical notes, looking at labs, looking at the prior images, looking at the prior reports, seeing what is relevant so that they could actually be that doctor's doctor, to go out to the ordering physician and give them a meaningful impression of what they are seeing in the images. And, the radiology images themselves don't stand alone in a vacuum, right? We see the pixels, we see some things in various shades of gray, but those could mean various things. And having that wider context is really important. And, when Faris and I were throwing around some ideas, we realized that, trying to use AI to make a radiologist faster at saying, I see a nodule, we're only going to shave off microseconds at that at best. Where if we could work on giving the radiologist some type of an assistant, a co-pilot, an agent, whatever you want to call it, that would actually allow them to, instead of having to go click in their EMR through a number of clinical notes. There's just so much information in those systems nowadays that to really do your job well, which there's so little time to do that well with the increasing caseloads that everyone sees nowadays, that takes a lot of time to really care for the patient. And I think the light bulb went off in our heads that the same way that as software engineers, we'd been using LLMs and some early agentic stuff to essentially go off and do some of the annoying work for us. Could we take things like MCP, hook a DICOM server up and wrap MCP around it? Could we do that with the EMR using Fire and translating Fire into MCP so that our LLM, our orchestrator, could go out and make those calls? And that really led us to that idea of, everyone could have their own assistant, their own resident, essentially, of giving them, it could be a draft report at one extreme, but there's so much other just surfacing the relevant priors or the relevant lab information or the relevant clinical notes for that specific case, right? And it's not just based upon the reason for study, but actually then combining a VLM or an imaging AI tool to be able to get a kind of first pass on what the computer sees in those images, and then looking within the EMR or the PACS for highly relevant cases, right? Like, one of the ones I think that we showed in our demo during the hackathon presentation was a lung nodule, right? Like, is that lung nodule new, and was it reported on previously? I think many PAC systems, the good ones today, will actually look by, body part examined to rank order the relevant priors. But we want to go a step beyond that and say, could we actually run a VLM both on the current study and priors to try to then associate and bubble up to that list to really let the radiologist focus in on this is most likely the most recent relevant case that you should be paying attention to.
No, exactly. I think just going off what John said about just improving the overall like radiologist workflow. Like my mom is a radiologist. Like throughout the years, I've seen her like what she does and like what she enjoys, what she doesn't. And like time and time again, whenever I hear her like complaining about things in work, it's never like, oh, this was such a hard study like to diagnose. It's always I had to slog through the PACS, the EMR. Some physician mislabeled this study from 4 years ago. It's always those things like that. And the thing that she does enjoy, she always says she enjoys like looking at the study, the problem solving of it, like looking at, okay, what in this image is wrong, and then taking all the other priors and stuff and making it like a puzzle and diagnosing it. So that's the fun thing for radiologists. And like I think overall the goal with an agents in any field is to not replace the person, especially when the main action is happening in milliseconds. It's to automate all the annoying clerical tedium to reduce the cognitive load and just keep it fun for the radiologist or whoever's using the AI, and to make it so that they can be more efficient in what they're doing. So I think exactly what John said, like just being able to take out the minutes that it takes to look through EMR and just give those tools immediately to the radiologist, along with their ability to look at the image, just improves their efficiency, and then will also make it so much of a better experience as they're diagnosing for the patient.
And Faris, I don't mean to take us too far off track, but I think it's been fascinating over the last few months looking at how software engineering's changed too, right? And I think like to the SIIM crowd, many of us do code. And it was interesting as you work through your internship, like the way that software engineering and as a practice is really evolving, right? Like I love it because it's brought joy back to some of the problem solving. It's like I get to delegate out some of the annoying tasks that I have to do. Upgrading libraries. I can just tell Claude Code to go upgrade libraries and run the test suite. And whenever there's an incompatibility, it will solve that for me, right? That's like house cleaning that I typically would have to do, but it's allowed me to really refocus and operate at a higher level as an engineer. And I think like that's kind of the exciting thing that I do predict that there will be within many domains, and I think radiology is probably an obvious next one, this ability to use these agents as a tool, an effective tool that allows us to amplify the work that we can do. And, I think being able to tie into some of these really like core they're no longer like emerging protocols, right? Between DICOM Web, FIRE. I think especially FIRE's, it's exciting over the past few years of getting increased adoption of FIRE within the radiology space, right? I mean, for so long it had just been within the EMR space, but now we have it both in the EMR space and in radiology. And I mean, I think the fun thing, Mohan, this was actually my first year doing the hackathon as well. I'd always watched you guys having fun, but had been providing demos in our booth throughout the years, so never had got to participate before. And it was really nice to be able to come to the hackathon, and SIIM had already provided a DICOM server with DICOM Web, EMR. I think under the hood it's happy, with test data in there, which, really was, having been around long enough, like there's a lot of work to get that all in place. And having those resources just made coming to the hackathon a really fun experience that you could kind of dive right in. There was real data that actually, those protocols are things that we're actually seeing in the field nowadays by a number of vendor systems. So, the ability to essentially play around with some wild ideas at the hackathon and have those potentially become real products in the not too distant future, because those are real protocols that we're dealing with now, is pretty exciting to me.
Definitely. I think coming in as someone not so well versed in the radiology and informatics field, just having those tools available right there and good guides to like understand what's going on made it a lot easier for me to jump in head first, especially since I wasn't planning on doing the hackathon until I got there. And obviously, of course, having John there to guide me, explain what DICOM and FIRE is, very much helped as well.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because for some reason, John, I didn't think it was your first hackathon, but I just realized I'm used to seeing you at SIIM, but just not at the hackathon. And of course, Faris, I've seen you at SIIM before, but that was many, many years ago. So I knew it was your first hackathon. That is really cool. I'm glad you two shared that insight. It's nice to hear that's helpful. I've been involved with the hackathon for many, many years, but it was actually my first year being able to just sit and enjoy watching the presentations. So that was really nice. I wanted to share a little story that, you and the listeners may find interesting. So last week I was at the USOMI annual meeting, which is the equivalent of SIIM. So it's the European Society of Medical Imaging Informatics. And they had two keynotes. One of the keynotes was given by Dr. Adrian Brady. He's an Irish radiologist. He started his keynote by saying, I know very little about AI, but here is where I see the profession going and where things could be useful. And two things he mentioned in his presentations that really resonated with me and your project was, one of the common problems a radiologist has is death by 1,000 cuts, which is all the little things they have to do, like you said, Faris, like go run in the EMR and stuff like that. And one of the examples he gave is, nowadays it feels like radiology has become a service. They become invisible, just more like you toss the ball to the other side and you wait for the ball to bounce back with the report. So he was saying one of the common problems he's seeing in the practice nowadays is that you've got these providers putting in orders with little to no context. So AI has a role here. We could maybe, gather some information and glean insights from the EMR that may give you a hint as to why this order was actually placed, rather than just the gibberish that you got in the order placement, 140 characters text box or whatever it is these days. And of course, that goes a long way in addressing things like radiologist shortage, because you're helping them become more efficient, also helping them be more satisfied with their work and less burnt out. Because I feel like that's one of the common trends I'm seeing these days. Just there's a lot of burnout, and there are people who are leaving the profession in droves. It's very worrying. There was actually another speech at the conference, now that I think about it. I don't remember who presented it, but someone was actually presenting the different specialties and subspecialties in medicine and their level of satisfaction with their work. Radiology was pretty low with level of satisfaction, with the exception of neuroradiology. Apparently, there's something going on in neuroradiology where they're all pretty happy compared to everybody else. Either that or they feel superior, if you know what I mean. Okay, so cheesy jokes aside, I'm actually curious to hear about your thoughts as far as where your project, which I understand may have been just a prototype for the SIIM Hackathon, but in general, where is this going next? Or your thoughts about where AI may be going next?
I mean, Faris, I think you can shed some light, but the first one that comes to mind is we're participating in the RSNA Reimagine demonstration, kind of taking this. For those people unaware, RSNA is gracious that there is a separate booth within the RSNA organization where vendors can kind of come and show using the newest specs from IHE, FIRE, and work together collaboratively over the summer to come to RSNA and then show integrations between the vendors, often really focused around AI. And we're part of a team. We'd worked on this over the summer and continue preparing. I'm actually in Chicago right now because I'm going to be doing testing with my peer teams in the coming days. But yeah, we're effectively taking this as the kernel and have built tooling that isn't officially widespread product at Hopper, but is up and coming product that we envision of providing some of this agentic capability of being able to hook in other systems. There's so much excitement going on in the foundation model, vision language model world right now that we actually have, depending on the body part and modality, we as an industry and research community have models that can do pretty good at seeing what is in the images. And, whether that is producing a draft report or whether that is being able to help drive something like the agentic system that we put together is pretty powerful. So, we envision that as being, and we'll show at the RSNA Reimagine, the capability of actually looking at a prior that was pulled from an actual real vendor, talking standards with that other vendor to pull that case. Similarly, calling out to the EMR to pull the clinical history and the lab tests to also focus in the likely diagnosis for that patient to gather the relevant information to the radiologists. And Mohana, as you brought up about the conference, yeah, that death by 1,000 cuts, I see that every time I watch a radiologist work, right? It has gotten so bad that I know, at times the volumes are just so high and, maybe people are at a practice where they don't have easy access. They might have to jump through a couple of hoops and they might be connected to a number of EMRs. They might be at like a teleradiology or some practice where the incentives, unfortunately, just aren't there for spending 5 or 10 minutes per case. They would never get through their day. And even at the places where that isn't the case, where there is easier access to the EMR, I've sat and watched friends and radiologists, dig through, because as you mentioned, the reason for study is a weird field because we are, as an industry, incentivized for billing purposes. Many of our IT solutions are geared at documenting information so that things can be billed, right? And that reason for study field, unfortunately, oftentimes is what the ordering provider can put in to get the study done. And I've seen the radiologists know that, right? And there's this dance that goes on where they then have to dive into the EMR to actually understand, why did you really order this study so that I can give you a meaningful interpretation? Because if I give you something back that just says recommend for clinical correlation, they just threw the ball back in the ordering provider's court without providing a ton of additional value. And I mean, I think the exciting thing is by helping the radiologist really laser focus into those relevant pieces of information, they can spend the limited time that they have on every study providing a very valuable service. And, I think it's interesting. I got the opportunity to work at Rad AI, and I wasn't part of this product, but their auto impression generating tool is one of the few tools where I'd seen, like, everyone makes claims, we're trying to prevent physician burnout. It actually felt like that was one where I watched my friends work, and when they used it, they seemed fresher at the end of the day. And that's kind of put in a series of ideas into my head of, yeah, if we can tackle more workflow type problems than diagnostic problems, that becomes a very powerful thing that we allow the radiologist to focus on what they're really good at and not have to do all of that clerical administrative work as much as possible. Because it turns out that a computer with a while loop that you hook in a couple things is actually really good at doing.
No, I 100% agree. I think like we're at a stage in AI in general, and specifically in the radiology AI landscape, that we have like these amazing models coming out, like Meta Image Insights, MedGemma, like private models like Hopper's model, things like that, that show that we can like read images with AI. But as we said before, like we don't necessarily need to replace the reading image because radiologists are already so good at that. But exactly what John said. Now it's like, how are we going to use these amazing technologies to actually improve the workflow? And I think like, yeah, our presentation at the hackathon was a really cool, like very minimum, like first concept of what it can be. And like the way I see it is like now coming into Radiology Reimagined, when we're actually plugging in two different vendors in a full radiology workflow, it's like our first, I guess, like minimum viable product of what I see as like a new common standard in radiology of having these agents that any radiologist can utilize to just significantly improve their like everyday life. And like if you improve that cognitive load, it like will help so much because yeah, exactly what you were saying. Like I've seen it with my family, and I guess studies have shown it overall that radiologists are the most of doctors that are like feeling the increasing load from just increasing patients in hospital systems and all that. So I think it's extremely important to be having these tools that reduce that.
Yeah, I know someone who in one day reads the same number of reviews that they read in a whole week 10 years ago. I mean, it's just mind-blowing that that's the situation in the industry, and it almost creates this, like, crazy feedback loop of the more people that get burned out, the more people that retire early, which causes more load for the remaining people and this downward spiral. But, yeah, as far as you mentioned something interesting, and it reminded me of a conversation we had during the project. You know, when we're focusing on the workflow aspect of this too, the interesting aspect is that you no longer need to aim to be as good as the radiologist. You just need to be good enough, right? You kind of sacrifice potentially some of your precision in the AI models because we're just trying to surface information to the radiologist. In many of the workflow cases, we're not trying to produce the end product, which is an interesting finding to me that, you know, there may be a number of things that models can be good enough before they are ready to be used in the way that they have been to date, right? Going through the FDA clearance process. And I don't mean to, you know, I think this is a whole fascinating area of like where the VLMs will fit in and where some of the agentic stuff will fit into that. So I don't mean to make any strong statements there other than I think it's an interesting opportunity. You know, if you think about everyone getting a resident, the resident isn't as good as an attending who's been practicing for 10 years. There are a number of practices that I've talked with where they have rad extenders or they may be trained rad techs to prep, you know, the workstation for a case for them and to bring up some of the relevant information. That's all stuff that I think in many ways the VLMs that are starting to enter the market or be published in open source are definitely at that level now, which I think is pretty exciting that it opens the door for solving a number of really fun and exciting workflow problems that are actually the majority of time that the radiologists often spend at their computer.
Yeah, no, I think that's a like super insightful point. And that's exactly like why we called it an AI radiology assistant, not AI radiologist, because we're not replacing the radiologist. Like an assistant, like inherently is not going to be as knowledgeable or as capable as the person it's assisting, but it's just exactly having one more like hand to help you out. It's like if you were cooking and you had like a third hand, they would just make it that much a little more easier. And that's exactly like what we're trying to achieve. Just not even fully like overhaul the workflow, just add a little bit of grace into like the radiologist day.
I think, you know, Mohammed, you'd kind of, I think, asked this question around where the project's going next. You know, I think one of the other things that we realized too is really needing to fit within the radiologist workflow today, right? Like it may be possible over the next few years that like a complete draft reporting of, complex cases across modalities is possible. But I think a lot of the ways that people have thought about this so far really requires an entire practice to switch the way that they are practicing medicine right now, their entire workflow. And that's a very jarring change. And, having rolled out products multiple times before, expecting that, especially with all the increased volume that we see nowadays and the burnout, expecting that the people who are already overburdened are going to fundamentally switch their workflow, I doubt that's going to happen. I think the more likely thing is if we as software engineers, product designers, technical folks, vendors, standards bodies, if we can see how the radiologists are working today and figure out ways that we can work within their workflow, right? The ability to, just as a resident is pre-drafting cases, allow the radiologist to still have all the normal navigation that they may need within the report. I think that there are just a lot of ways where we can meet radiologists where they are today that doesn't require redefining how the practice is done today. And as a software engineer, like I'll often bring up my experiences, but I think that's like why we've seen a lot of adoption of Claude Code. It fit within a lot of the existing tooling that people had, or OpenAI Codex, and leverages, you didn't have to change your development environment. You just had to work on the command line and type something in, right? So it became a very easy thing for me to integrate into my practice of software engineering. So yeah, I think that I try to draw inspiration from, because I think that we're seeing the vanguard of how AI is being used in other industries right now. And we don't have to necessarily reinvent all of those ideas here, but I think intelligently applying them. And, I think that that's one of the great things about some of the standards that exist now, right? Like we are able to hook into a number of these things, from the AI results, AWI profile, I think, being able to help reprioritize a work list based upon AI findings, or communicate the results into reporting solutions. I think there will likely have to be a number of additional changes that do happen to really make this a seamless process in the radiologist's existing workflow. But I think that's really how we meet the radiologist where they are and give them tools to effectively make their day-to-day seamlessly less painful.
That's actually really interesting. I haven't necessarily thought about that as much because I'm studying cognitive science in school. So I love thinking about like how these things like impact the way people think, or like how like psychology impacts like product adoption. So I think like exactly what John was saying, like if you want high product adoption like fast, you need to make sure that like it's like the easiest possible for your customer to integrate into like their current workflow. Mohamed, I'm actually curious, like, have you seen, I guess, over the past few months, over the past year, like comparing the more successful AI tools to the less successful AI tools, have they been following that trend of, I guess, that like ease of integration?
I hear different things from my friends who are in the industry, almost conflicting. I mean, just last week, I was sitting at a dinner table with a number of friends, and one friend was bashing one AI tool that I'm definitely not going to name here today. But the week prior, I was talking to another friend who uses the AI tool and loves it. So I think it's different for a variety of reasons. We also have to remember that here we have a lot of variables. Like even before the advent of AI, I used to work for a PACS vendor in the industry. And even then, there were stark differences between how radiology is conducted in North America versus how it was conducted in other parts of the world. So just like as a random example, my observations at the time, this is, going back almost 10 years, that in North America, the use of a voice dictation system was a given. Like everyone had a voice dictation system to dictate their reports. And they usually used a separate one that was not PACS. Whereas my experience was that in Europe, most people seem to be content using their dictation system that's already built into PAC system. So these were some of the differences. The same is true for AI. So as I said, like as far as these pixel analysis, classic AI product, I hear different things. I hear almost like conflicting stories. However, you saw me last week. I happened to see my good friend, Dr. Nabil Safdar, present. And he was talking about some of the work they're doing at Emory. And it really was extremely enlightening to hear the cool things they were doing. One of the things he offered in his presentation was that regardless of which AI tools you use, whether it's, classic, image analysis, or it's LLM or VLM or foundation models, etc., we also have to start thinking about a new angle to AI, which is it can actually be a factor in job satisfaction and being able to retain your staff, which is very valuable because a lot of people are just thinking about it from a point of, hey, the radiologists, let's make them more efficient so we can squeeze more money out of them. You know what I mean? So this is one healthy way to look at it, in my opinion, is let's see if we can make them happier people, and then they're more likely to stick and not leave, because you also have that gap also between academic radiologists and non-academic radiologists. I have friends who left academia because they were just tired of having to do things a certain way. A couple of things, since we talked about Nabil, that he also brought up in his talk that were absolutely brilliant. I'm like, we need more people like him and his team that think about original creative applications for AI. So they actually deployed a concept of ambient listening. So providers, this is not specific to radiology, this is more for other specialties. Providers could basically put their phone on the table, and the AI applications in this case would listen to their encounter with the patient and then record their clinical notes, which is less paperwork for them to do, right? The analogy here for radiology that I've seen people talk about, but I haven't actually initially seen it demonstrated that well yet, is the concept of stream of consciousness reporting. So, you dictate anything you see in regardless of what order, and then AI could take that and put it into a proper structured report for you. That goes a long, long way. Another super cool example that Nabil gave was the use of AI agents to perform tasks like, for example, calling patients, reminding them about their medication or, appointments and stuff like that. In this way, it feels more natural, conversational. Nabil actually gave a hilarious screenshot of one patient that was having fun with AI. They were literally having like a fun conversation where at some point the patient says something along the lines to the AI model, "Hey, I like you." So then the AI model asks it, "How would you rate my services?" He's like, "I'm going to be very honest. I'm going to give you a 9 because I really like you."
I think it is exciting just as a patient. Like the ambient listening is, I think, exciting. I look back 5 years ago, my provider just looked at their computer, right? They've innovated 2 times ago when I went to the doctor's office. They brought in a scribe to the room, right? Essentially, like a tech came into the room and was actually the one doing the documentation while the physician looked at me. That seemed very personal again. But I think, that represents a whole nother person in the room, where I think the ambient dictation is really exciting in that primary care situation, that it lets the physician go back to practicing medicine rather than being a typist, which is exciting. The radiology world, though, yeah, the ambient makes a little bit less sense because you don't have multi-speaker where you have to disambiguate who's talking about what, and you throw in the patient's parent as well occasionally. There are a lot of interesting problems there. But yeah, I had worked with Bill Boone and Woojin Kim at Rad AI, and we kind of took that impression generation product and realized that we could build a full reporting product around that with speech, and it would allow radiologists. Woojin made this analogy when he was going through training. It was actually when they had the dictaphones and film that they would put up. At that point, you would just say whatever you wanted, and then a transcriptionist would turn that into a report. You'd review that later in the day or the next day and sign off on it. But, we introduced speech recognition to radiology, which had some benefits, especially like some of the structured reporting can act as a checklist to make sure that you're going through everything. There are benefits to that, but it does slow you down, right? Like there's this cognitive load, and this is a workflow problem in many ways, right? Like the cognitive load of trying to remember while your eyes are focused on the packs, on the image, what field am I currently in my report? And I just saw something, but I know that organ is 4 fields down, I think, in this template, but I want to keep on looking at the images. And yeah, one of the innovations we had, which we called Omni Report, was effectively the ability to freeform dictate into a general text box. And then we used an LLM to do that transcriptionist type work of putting it back into a structured report that the practice or the radiologist wanted to use. And I think that that's a really powerful concept going back to meeting radiologists where they are today, right? Like structured reporting is an important thing within radiology. Every practice has templates that they want to use so that there is a quality product that they are putting out. Yeah, I can train an LLM, a VLM today that can generate a report, but is it a report in your personal template or your site template? Sure, you could do additional training and fine tuning on that, but if I want to make changes to my template, does that get reflected? And I think that's a really interesting area that is still, when we think about some of the VLM stuff, still not fully solved, which, I find pretty interesting.
I think the big theme with what both of you guys are saying about like ambient listening, dictation without having to fit it into different fields is just like the idea of making everything as natural as possible, like as like natural to like normal human like daily life. Like for a radiologist, I'm sure again with like reducing radiology cognitive load, if they're just talking into their dictation device, just conversationally, like they're talking to another person, that's so much easier than having to make sure that they're talking in specific clinical vocabulary, saying exactly what they're seeing. Just one less thing to worry about and just more brain power that can focus on the actual reading the image. And yeah, I think that's like the biggest theme today is just making the radiologist's life easier. And like from an outside perspective, that sounds exactly like what all these tools are doing.
So this has been awesome. We're unfortunately running out of time, so I'm going to try and close with a question. So, Faris, you're obviously a student right now, and you're new to the hackathon. So I'm curious if you found your SIIM membership to be useful outside of the annual meeting. So aside from attending the annual meeting, have you found the membership useful? And regardless of what your answer is, I'm actually curious if you have answer for anyone who's relatively new in their career and like just finding their way as far as societies like SIIM and so on and so forth.
I wish I utilized my membership more, especially over the summer during my internship in Hopper, because I know SIIM has like so many amazing resources for like people, radiologists, just people in the industry. And I think like utilizing that would have been really useful as we were trying to solve these different problems. So I think definitely for people getting into the field, like with new members, like I recommend like using the membership to the best of your ability. But also, I think one way, not necessarily from the membership, but just like utilizing the SIIM sort of ecosystem is I know. So I'm actually organizing my own hackathon for what my student Oregon campus right now. And like, I just thought, oh, I participated in a hackathon. Maybe I can get some advice. So I like ping like Thomas O'Sullivan because he's the one that was running the hackathon at SIIM. So he gave me a few helpful tips from his experience. So I think that just speaks towards the SIIM network and the willingness of people to help each other out if they know like you're in that same, just similar interests, same body. But yeah.
That's awesome. Tom is a great guy. So since we mentioned him, shout out to Tom. All right. So before I thank you both for your time, any closing thoughts? Anything else you wanted to share?
I think everyone should try the SIIM Hackathon. It was a lot of fun. We'll definitely try it next year. And also, I think the effort to take your idea and bring it to a prototype, it has never been lower. So get OpenAI Codex, get Claude Code. We used LangGraph and Olama and some MCP programs, but everyone should be able to bring some cool ideas both to the hackathon and to the industry.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you both for your time. I appreciate it. And hope to see you at a SIIM sometime soon.
Totally. Thank you so much.
SIIMcast has been brought to you by the Society of Imaging Informatics in Medicine. Please visit our website at SIIM.org for more information and educational content, including webinars and an archive of prior episodes. Please follow us on Twitter at SIIM_tweets. Thank you to our listeners for your continued support.